Heather Williams, California After School Network, and Jen Dietrich, also at the Partnership for Children and Youth. And Kim Cabayas is supporting us on the CalSAC side with tech and chat. And we are super excited to be with you today. So let's move on to, let's go to that third slide, if you would, Kim. There we are, smiling faces. Okay, today's objectives. We hope you walk away today with enhanced advocacy skills and feel comfortable to carry those into your experience with legislators during the challenge. And then also, we want you to understand a little bit better the California state budget and how it impacts your programs, schools, and communities. I think the state budget can be a little nebulous, a little outside of our purview. So we're going to talk today about what it means for your specific programs, how it impacts you, and how you can advocate for your communities. So that's what we hope you walk away with today. Our agenda today looks like this. We're going to start with a fun activity we like to call Pet of the Year. You might have played this with us in years past. I'm excited to get into that with you to warm us up and get our advocacy muscles stretched and flowing. Then we're going to get into the California budget, what it means for expanded learning. Next, we'll walk through advocacy versus lobbying and give some examples. Then we'll talk about what taking action looks like around the budget and advocacy. And then we'll close. So that'll be our 90 minutes together. Feel free as we go through to put comments or questions in the chat. We'll have opportunities to get into breakout rooms, engage with each other. Hopefully it'll stay engaging. But if you have questions, drop those in the chat and we'll try to grab them as we see them. And some of them might get answered throughout the webinar. So that's what today looks like. Well, let's get into our first activity. So everyone grab a piece of paper or a Google Doc, whatever you prefer. And on that piece of paper, I want you to write the name of your pet, past, present, or imagined, and give us 2 to 3 reasons why your pet deserves to win Pet of the Year. So you're going to take a few minutes to write that down. And then you're going to try to convince others in your group, in your breakout group that we're going to get into in a minute, why your pet deserves Pet of the Year. So you're going to use those reasons that you wrote down. Those are your talking points, right? We're practicing our talking points here in preparation for meeting with legislators and being good advocates. You're going to use your talking points to convince others why your pet deserves Pet of the Year. And then at the end, you will cast one vote for who you think should be Pet of the Year, and it can't be your own. So you got to vote for a different pet. So again, we're writing down your current, past, or an imagined pet. Choose one, 2 to 3 reasons why they should win Pet of the Year, and then you're going to try to convince others why they should win. Okay. Any questions on that before we break out? We'll be in groups of 3 to 4. And we'll give folks about 5-ish minutes.
Okay, I am going to go ahead and open up all of these breakout rooms.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Kim. Okay, seeing mostly CBOs, some others. If you chose other, can you put in the chat what other means to you? Would love to hear where y'all are coming from. Okay, 5 more seconds if you haven't voted yet. Last chance, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's close it up. Okay, here's what we're looking like. I see no school districts, mostly CBOs and other. Thanks for putting in the chat where y'all are coming from. Okay, nonprofit world. Yep. Okay, cool. That's helpful. Next poll. Want to know, have you been to the challenge before? Is this going to be your first challenge up in Sacramento in March this year? Or are you a veteran? So, oh, oh, that's fine. Okay, yeah. Have you been to the challenge before? Yes, no, maybe. Maybe it's been.
That, sorry, Ben, this was my bad right here.
All good. We're gonna roll.
The
This is
coffee
how
has not made yet, clearly for me.
the Zoom polls. Awesome. Good mix. Okay, good mix of yes. So we got a lot of first time folks, a lot of folks have already been before. Awesome. Love it. Okay, 5 more seconds. 4, 3, last chance to vote. Okay, let's close it up. And then Kim, are you planning to attend? Oh, we just switched them, right? We just switched them on that one. Is that right?
I can relaunch the one that I was supposed to share
Yeah, let's relaunch that one. Yeah. Let's do it.
already.
Thanks, Kim. Okay, last question for you all. Are you planning to attend the challenge this year? Are you planning to attend? Oh, there you go. Okay, you got two. Yeah, you got two to choose from. So have you been to the first one you can click on is have you been to the challenge before? Second one is are you planning to attend? So figure most people are, just want to get a sense. Maybe some folks are just here to learn, get some good info on advocacy and lobbying and the budget. Maybe, not sure yet. Okay, mostly yes and maybes. Okay, cool. That is super helpful context. Thanks, y'all. Kim, let's go ahead and close those up. And then I'll share just so y'all can see where we ended up. Okay, cool. So we got a good mix of folks in the room. Some who are challenge veterans, not your first time. Some who are new to challenge. Some who may be attending, most of us, and then some maybe not sure yet. So hopefully we'll convince you that you should attend the challenge and it's good for your program. Okay, let's keep rolling. First, want to kind of set the stage for the California budget. So I'm going to pass it to Jen to walk us through that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. And thank you all for sharing about your pets. It's a great way to start dipping your toe into advocacy. So before we get into what advocacy and lobbying is, let's give you a little bit of background of what's going on with the budget this year. And especially what it means for proposals that may affect expanded learning programs. So this slide is chaotic, but it will give you a link so you can look at it closer. But it helps kind of break down what the regular budget process looks like each year for the state of California. You may have seen the headlines already that the governor has already released his proposal for the FY 24-25 budget year. This has to be done by January 12th every year, and it really just kicks off the beginning of this whole process. Thank you, fiscal year. So this infographic is made by the California Budget and Policy Center. We'll give you links to other resources that they create to help people understand what is in the budget and what it could mean. So let's start looking at this infographic. If we start in the lower right-hand corner, this is where January 10, the governor needs to submit a proposal. It's not fully baked at this point. So even the one that we just saw released a couple weeks ago, it's not fully tied up and with a bow or anything like that. There's a whole lot more work that needs to happen. It makes a lot of headlines, but we see summaries of proposals, but we don't see a lot of the details yet. There's something called a budget trailer bill, which will give all the nitty-gritty details, we hope, about the proposed changes, whether it's policy or implementation, it's what this funding in the budget is going to be used for. Some things, right, for policy get made through bills. Sometimes it gets shoved into this trailer bill language instead. And in this trailer bill language in the past, for example, we see the big headline that ELO-P is proposed to get $4 billion. But when we look at the trailer bill language, we start to look into, okay, here's some of the reporting that's needed on folks serving TK off campus, or hey, this is what we're doing in terms of licensing. Those types of things will come up in the trailer bill language. So we definitely want to go through those details. Okay, so heading clockwise, after this proposal goes out, the advocates start weighing in on what's proposed. We hear, we love it. Thank you so much for proposing to protect ELO-P. We also hear from folks who wish they had seen something different in the budget, and they propose what they'd like to see. And this comes through letters. It comes through individual meetings with members, or speaking at a committee hearing. There's a number of ways that you can kind of help share your reaction or thoughts to the budget proposal. And then we get to see the legislature weigh in. So they will hold, there's like budget and budget subcommittee hearings that really try to pick in to all the different pieces of the whole budget. Not everything that's in the budget comes up in these hearings. Sometimes it's just, we got the proposal, not much has changed, so we don't have to spend time on that in the hearing. It's really to focus on those places where legislators want to know more. They have different suggestions, they have concerns. So this is really kind of it highlights the hot topics for the year in those hearings. Also in these hearings, they're exciting in that we get to hear from the governor's representative, the Department of Finance, the people who write the budget and the details, to help explain what's the intent of the proposal, or answering some of the detailed questions that we don't know yet. So they get to testify, and legislators get to ask questions. Also, folks from the Department of Education will come and weigh in as well. And then the Legislative Analyst's Office is usually on this panel. And just want to give you a little bit of background. The Legislative Analyst's Office, it's a nonpartisan research and analysis office. It's part of government, and they are there to advise the legislature on policy and finance. Underlining, though, that all their opinions and proposals are not followed. These are proposals or thoughts for consideration for the legislature to look into and decide on their own. But what the LAO says doesn't mean that's what will happen. And actually, in the past, we've seen some concerns about, well, maybe they suggested that we could make a cut to after school funding. They've suggested that because they're just trying to balance the budget. They want to make sure that if there's a deficit, we can bring in more revenue or make some cuts to balance out. And so often when that happens, we have to push back on them a little bit to say, like, well, here's what's happening with that money. Here's how it's needed in the field, and try to explain and push back on some of the suggestions we may not be in favor of. With the Department of Education, they represent the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. And currently that's Tony Thurman. They are often in line with what the governor's office proposes, but it is an independent office that's elected separately, so that could look different. So with all these hearings, this testimony, and trying to dig out answers of these questions, there are usually no votes until we get to May or June. This is just kind of getting all the conversations started, the fact finding, and hearing from advocates with better understanding of what's happening on the ground and what may be proposed. So going over to May 14th, that's the biggest date, I think, in this budget year. So that is when the state has updated revenue numbers from the taxes that hopefully all came in April. And they can say, hey, this is how much money we have right now. Here's what's proposed. These are the changes we want to see. So sometimes they, refine their proposals. They give, they may change it a bit or add more details since they've had more time to look into it. They can, help add changes they want to see, whether it's supporting, opposing, something brand new. The Assembly and the Senate get to highlight their own priorities and come up with their own budget proposal. And in the past, the Assembly would create a proposal and the Senate would create a proposal, and then they would go into a conference committee to agree on one proposal to get to the governor. In the last few years, that has not happened. The Assembly and the Senate have gone behind closed doors and had all their negotiation and come back with one proposal to share with the public and to pitch to the governor. So there are different ways people weigh in on the budget throughout the process. And each year, the legislators need to vote on a proposal by June 15th, and the governor needs to sign a budget by July 1st. Additionally, nowadays, we see that some of the fine tuning in the budget trailer language or a policy that can be adjusted afterwards in what they call budget cleanup. And then also there are some times when there are emergency situations like with the pandemic where they need to urgently get funding out the door. So just want to give you that overview of the budget process. You don't need to know these details, but we'll give you this graphic so you can kind of refer back to and see what's happening depending on the time of the year. Going on to expanded learning in this budget, the headline is we're grateful. We are grateful that the governor proposes to sustain funding for expanded learning programs while there is a deficit for the state. We're excited that they're not proposing a cut, but we're definitely not out of the woods because we have a long process and a lot of conversations to have. But at this point, the governor's keeping with the commitment to expand access to expanded learning programs for kids across the state through ELO-P and help get us closer to that end goal of universal access. The proposal also sustains the current daily rates for ACES in 21st century. And again, just what you should know is that in parts of the budget, there are going to be significant reductions and cuts. But when it comes to education and certain initiatives, they want to keep it whole. They want to keep their proposal together and see it through. What's important for you all to know is there will be a lot of questions. Whether it's in the budget committee or the policy committee, there's going to be a lot of questions about, what funding is being put to use. They want to know, what are they getting for $4 billion of investment every year? They want to know what's different. It used to be X and now it looks Y. And it's so critical to hear that from you all because the state is not collecting and compiling data across the board. So often when there is an initiative across the state will collect data, compile it, analyze, and help kind of understand like where we are with implementation, what's working, what's not. And we don't have that information right now. And it's especially helpful to help, it's especially important to remember what the intent of ELO-P is. So it was to reduce barriers to expanded learning programs and help close the opportunity gap for the students from under-resourced families. So folks are very interested to know if these dollars are reaching the students and families that it was supposed to reach. The decision makers, they should know what you all are doing to ramp up efforts, to expand access, to connect with more families and students, and and ultimately lift up all the great things that you guys are already doing. And when we think about the students that ELO-P is supposed to prioritize, we are talking about unduplicated pupils, but the definition is multilingual English learners, students that qualify for free or reduced price meals, and kids in the foster system. So those are the folks who were prioritized to get access and provide additional funding for. And then, folks can open it up depending on what they're required to, like how many people they need to try to offer it to, all that stuff. There are details into that. But without, state data and analysis, it's really important to hear what's happening in your own community. And that can be at the state level with legislators and also with your local decision makers. And the message that we're trying to put out at this point is we're not at the goal. We are not at universal access. We are not going to say that the goal has been met. But this historic investment in expanded learning opportunities is already making a positive impact for kids, for families, for communities. And we're really going to dig in and try to highlight what that looks like for these decision makers. We often use the word educate. So separate from lobbying, it's just helping them understand what progress you've seen in your community, what's the impact, and the future for where this funding and investment can go over time. I'm going to go through a couple of questions that we will come back to later on, but some of the questions that may be helpful for you to understand, what kind of information would be helpful to share with decision makers, especially when we're talking about budget proposals. So one example is like, how is your district leveraging this money? What are the exciting opportunities and changes that have been possible because of ELO-P, those innovations? You can also share what's going on in your community. For context, it takes some time to ramp up. We have to recruit and train and retain folks, and we can't, meet all the demand right now. It takes time to connect with families in their own language and get students back on campus. And we also know that there are some districts who didn't get started with implementing ELO-P right off the bat. It's been, maybe they're starting to move now. But it's helpful to remind the legislators, where you are, we're not supposed to be at full success and goal right now. We're building. It would also be helpful for decision makers to understand what would happen if those ELO-P dollars were cut or taken away. What would the impact be on students and families, teachers and other school staff, and for their community and partners? What would that look like? And lastly, the thing that we are trying to do most right now is trying to paint a picture for decision makers. If we can think of, a student or a family, what were they dealing with before or currently, and how ELO-P is coming to help give them support. And so we will dig into some of those answers later, but want to open it up to you all on questions about the budget process or key dates before moving on. So I don't know if folks want to put a question in the chat or raise your hand. Okay. You can continue to put questions in the chat, but Heather, I'll kick it to you for now.
Thanks, Jen. All right, so now we talked, so Jen talked about the complicated budget process. And now we're going to talk about folks' really fun topic of lobbying, and can you lobby? What does it mean to lobby, etc. And so I'm just going to invite you all to think for a moment. I'm sure we've all heard the term lobbying. We've all heard of lobbyists. So think about what comes to mind when you hear the term lobbying, or you hear someone referred to as a lobbyist. It might not be positive, and that's okay. And if you want to share what comes to mind in the chat box, feel free to go ahead and drop that in. But we're going to dig into a little bit of what it truly means to lobby, and are you able to do that, and just some resources for you to dig in further, because I know as we think about engaging in the budget process, kind of the next question comes up is like, well, what exactly am I allowed to do when it comes to lobbying? So this can get pretty complicated. If we're going to try to keep it high level and then provide some resources that if you have more in the weeds questions, you can ask those, but we might direct you to some other resources. So we'll go ahead and just jump right in. And so first I want to say that lobbying is a form of advocacy. So it falls under the advocacy umbrella. And so first we're going to talk broadly about what does it mean to advocate. So on the next slide, why is it important to advocate? We can help legislators make informed decisions about policies that impact our programs and communities we serve. And so Jen just talked a lot about this with the current budget, right? There's not a lot of statewide data right now. And so if we want legislators to, they have a lot to consider. It's not just our programs. There's a lot of in the weeds details to think about for the budget. Even when you look at the larger education budget, there are so many different things to consider. And so if we want them to be the most educated when they're making those decisions about the budget, it's really important that we share what we can about our programs. And so advocacy largely is just about supporting legislators and other decision makers to make informed decisions. So digging into that, there's a wide range of types of advocacy. And so this is a great little chart, and some folks get concerned like, oh, I can't lobby, so I can't do anything. But really, there is a wide range of advocacy efforts. You'll see like green light, yellow light, red light. And so all of these are potential ways you can engage in advocacy, but depending on your organization, your organization's policy, if you're doing this on work time, if you're doing this in your personal time, if work is paying for you to go travel to Sacramento, those are all things to consider whether you can engage in some of these activities. And so the red light, that's getting into really specific things like endorsing candidates or contributing to candidates. There's so many more limitations on that. That's why it's the red light. A lot of times it's really limited as an organization to be able to engage in that, or for you to do that on your organization's time. Whereas if you go to the right and you're looking at a lot of these that are green light, public education, capacity building, nonpartisan voter education, et cetera, these are really things that folks can engage in regardless. So when you hear the term advocacy, we really want you to consider there's this wide range of activities. There's some that anybody, anytime can engage in, and then there's some that are more, yellow light, red light. You need to consider your organization's policies before you engage in that. And so digging in a little bit more to lobbying specifically, just quick, short, unofficial definition is trying to influence legislation, including the budget process that Jen just talked about, and ballot measures. And so again, if you look at that orange circle, advocacy is this huge group of activities, and lobbying is a subset of that. So it's not that lobbying isn't advocacy, it's a particular type of advocacy that has restrictions on it. So very simple example is if you go to a legislator and say, we really want you to vote yes on this assembly bill. At that moment, you are lobbying your legislator. There are different types of lobbying. They have different requirements, different reporting expectations, et cetera. And so high level, just want to kind of flag the two major types of lobbying. Again, this can get really into the weeds, and like you might have follow-up questions about specifics, which is totally okay. But high level, we look at lobbying in two different ways. There's grassroots. And so this is a lot of like, this is what CAN does. This is what PCY does. We send out public communication to folks on our listservs or on our social media. And we basically, we might say, oh, there's this piece of legislation. We are wanting that legislation to pass. So we are asking you all to contact your legislators and ask them to support this legislation. And so if as an organization, you are asking others to engage in lobbying, that's really when it becomes this grassroots. A lot of you all probably won't have to worry about this. A lot of you, what you would actually be engaged in is direct lobbying. And so this is when you, as an individual, whether you're on organization time or not, you're having direct communication. It could be with a legislator, could be with one of their staff, some other government official that's working on legislation. And again, you're reflecting a specific view on that legislation. So if you just go and say, there's this legislation, it could increase funding for Expand in Learning. This is what it does. If it passes, this is the impact. If it doesn't pass, this is the impact. That's very neutral and still is advocacy. Once you cross the line and say, we would like you to vote yes on this legislation, or we would like you to vote no, that's when you have crossed the line into direct lobbying. And a lot of you might be able to do that, but it's clear to know where that line is. And so on the next slide, so again, reiterating, there's lots of non-lobbying advocacy options. And so you might be worried like, oh, I don't think I can engage in lobbying. I'm not sure if I can. Again, you can educate the public, you can educate decision makers, you can share data. These are how many students attend our program. This is what the waiting list looks like. This is what we do in our programs. That's all sharing data, just informing, educating. You can also thank lawmakers for past support. So you can say, you know, we appreciate your support on the budget last year. That's still hasn't crossed the line into lobbying. So even if you can't lobby, there's a lot you can do and share in spaces. And so I think the next slide, okay, so advocacy and action, we'll talk more about this. So all of these things that are listed, you can do advocacy. You can also cross the line into lobbying, but when you're doing site visits, when you are doing legislative visits, when you're hosting Lights On After School, when you're attending the challenge, whether it's California's or the national, all of these have opportunities for advocacy. They do have specific opportunities for lobbying, but most of them also just have non-lobbying activities. So you can engage in any of these activities. You, again, just need to know if you can lobby or not. So on the last slide for me, I just want to share a couple of resources. We can drop these links to these in the chat. So the After School Alliance is a national organization that supports after-school programs. They host the annual National After School Challenge. They have good resources, so that will hyperlink to their resources around advocacy and lobbying specifically. One of my favorite resources is Boulder Advocacy, and they do a lot to support nonprofits to understand how they can engage in lobbying. So highly recommend this one. There's very specific guidance for California, and thank you, Ben, for dropping all of those in. So I would definitely check out Boulder Advocacy. They have fantastic resources. But first and foremost, this probably should be number one. Number 3 on the list is to check with your organization's legal counsel. Your organization likely has a policy about lobbying. And so some organizations might say, you can't lobby if you're on our organization's time. And that's helpful to know. You can still lobby as an individual, but that means if you, for example, are traveling to Sacramento, your organization says you can't lobby, you would need to make sure that you are paying for travel, you're not doing it on work time, if you choose to lobby. Or if you are doing it on work time with work resources, that you make sure you stay within the bounds of non-lobbying advocacy. So it's really important for your organization to tell you what's allowed and not allowed on their time and their money. And then every organization will have requirements for reporting. And so again, this gets way into the weeds, but there's different expectations for how much time you spend lobbying, if the organization has to report it or not, if they have to register if their staff as lobbyists. Most of you won't have to worry about this, but it's good to just know if your organization expects you to do this, and they can give you more details about how to record the time if that's something you have to track. So again, if you're not sure, double check with your organization, your legal counsel. If you don't know who your legal counsel is, check with your boss, have them get that information for you. So if you have questions that are more in the weeds, feel free to drop those into the chat. We're going to keep moving on because we've got a bunch of stuff to cover, but we'll try to answer any questions in the chat box or follow up afterwards. So Ben, I think I'm passing it back to you.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks, Heather, for laying that foundation for us. So that was helpful. Now let's talk a little bit about what taking action looks like and what we can do in our programs, in our communities. So first and foremost, the most important thing that we can do is run high quality programs. Many of you are already doing this on a day-to-day basis, but giving more students and families access to your programs and showing legislators how and why serving your community is so important, again, which most of you are already doing day to day, is the most important thing you can do. It's more important than understanding the legislative process or the current politics of the Assembly and the Senate and what's going on in the governor's administration. Way more important than that is running those programs and then explaining how you're serving your community. So this is what advocacy is all about. This is why we do this, right? Is to serve kids and families. So that's what first and foremost we should all be focused on. Cutting those programs, right now, getting into the budget situation would impact families, as we know. Fewer kids with access to programs is a bad thing. So that's why we celebrate victories like sustaining ELO-P. And that's why running those high quality programs and showing how we're serving this community is so important. So that's the foundation that we're building off of, right? And that's what allows us to do things like participate in the challenge. So when we're running those programs, we're able to talk to legislators about what that looks like on the ground. So speaking of challenge, Heather, if I can pass it back to you, can you tell us, is challenge lobbying? Are we able to do this in Sacramento?
Yeah, this is great. So if you haven't noticed, all these webinars are helping build capacity as we get ready for the upcoming challenge. And so is it lobbying or not? Whether you're allowed to lobby or not, there are ways to engage in the challenge where you can just engage in general advocacy. And so anybody can attend the challenge and advocate. And so again, this goes back to like, consider your activity. So if you are going to the legislature, you have a legislative visit, you're talking to a staffer and you tell them you would like them to take a specific action, then you've crossed the line into lobbying. But if you are more broadly there educating them, then you are still in that realm of non-lobbying activity. And so again, consider what you're saying, consider your employer. That's why I said it's really important to know what their policy is around this and who's paying. So is your employer paying for you to be there? Or are you traveling on your own money and your own time? So you can certainly lobby while you're at the challenge, but you can also really engage in a lot of non-lobbying advocacy And that's really important. Like Ben was just saying, the number one way to advocate is to run high quality programs, and then to make sure our legislators are aware of those programs and their impact. And so you can share all of that without asking them to take a specific action. You can say, thank you for your ongoing support of expanded learning programs. This is the impact it's having in our local community. Share that information and end the conversation, and you haven't engaged in lobbying yet. So Ben, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather. I really want to see you all in 7 weeks in Sacramento at the challenge in person. But if you can't, thanks, Kim, for dropping that challenge info. If you can't attend the challenge in Sacramento, there are other things that you can do to advocate for your community and for your program. Lights On every fall in October is a great way to show off your community and show what actions you're taking, inviting legislators and so on. To that same end, site visits year-round are always a great way to show the community, to show local elected officials your program. You can also advocate on social media by tagging your decision makers, superintendents, elected officials in the state, and so on, and share pictures, share photos, tell them about your program on social media. Give your gratitude for sustaining ELO-P, right? That can always be done online, and legislators are on Twitter or X or whatever we call it nowadays, LinkedIn and so on. Share anecdotes, share stories from your programs. You can share or author news articles or op-eds or blog posts, whatever you have access to. Those are great ways to reach lots of people and not have to be in person. So you can share all of these resources, including this webinar. When you have the recording to this webinar and all of the links we've been sharing, share these details with folks who couldn't attend, or your colleagues or your friends. Tell them what lobbying versus advocacy is. Tell them about the resources that they can use to advocate for their programs. So lots of actions that you can take. But again, we hope to see you in Sacramento for the challenge in March. So now what I want to do is pass it to our friend and colleague over at BACR. Gabby is going to tell us a little bit about her local engagement, and we're super excited that Gabby decided to join us today and be our special guest. So Gabby, can you tell us about your experience, since I know you have lots of it, engaging with decision makers, and what advocacy and engagement looks like from your vantage at BACR?
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, you guys have covered so much interesting information. We at BACR, to be completely honest, we're a really large agency, and we hadn't done as much advocacy as we should have been doing, but we've really kind of kicked it into gear over the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years. For myself, and kind of my journey started really at the challenge about 7 years ago. And it was pretty inspiring. I can't see everybody, but if you haven't been to the challenge, please go. It's pretty exciting, and it definitely just gets all your senses going, and really that sense of purpose of why we do this work, because it's such hard and rewarding work at the same time. It's really important that we are able to tell our stories, right? And the challenge is an opportunity to do that. The first year I was on a team, but I didn't do a lot of talking because, I'll be honest, I was nervous. Gosh, it looks so weird with this blur behind me. My head looks like a light bulb. Um, anyway, and during the pandemic, I decided to be a team lead. And as we all know, that was a really difficult time, but it was really important to get our voices heard. It was so important that our ACES funding wasn't affected, so we didn't lose all of our amazing staff that do this work. So we did a pretty good job of doing the challenge virtually, and we got a lot of people that had never, ever done this before, kind of myself included, to really speak about what we do and share visuals. Zoom does have its luxury of, in some spaces, to be able to show pictures and videos and those kinds of things. And that's what we did. And we were able to have parents and students and lots of different people speak. And it was great. Last year we did it in person. I was part of a team, and it's hard to, CalSAC's amazing, PCY, y'all do such a good job to support the work and help us and give us tools. Last year when we were in Sacramento, two of the people that we were meeting with sent their assistants. And, at first we were like, oh, I guess we're just kind of chopped liver here. But we were really touched by how much they listened, took really extensive notes. And, we had a follow-up email and we got some response back. So it felt like it had impact. We had staff there that were not only coordinators, but were also parents who had their students in expanded learning. And to have that face-to-face connection with some of these folks that are making pretty big decisions for all of us, is pretty impactful. So Lights On is another really great opportunity. This year in Oakland, we had Mia Bonta from District 18. And again, our stories are so important, but feeling the program is huge. I think that we get really used to just kind of being in our own little silo in our schools, and we forget about some of the amazing work that we're doing. And it's so important to share. I think the impact of being at a site for somebody not in our field to see this work, it's pretty phenomenal. And I don't think we give ourselves enough credit to show what we do. So there's major impact in doing site visits and the challenge. I'm on board forever now. I mean, I really am. I think it's so important. This ELO-P money, as for all you know, has been a game changer. It has really helped us with sustainability for students, and our staffing, really, for our kids to make long-term connections with some of our staff, I think and being able to offer more services, more providers, more. I mean, I've been doing this work for 15 years, and I feel like we've kind of been forgotten about, but really necessary. Like, I think we felt it during the pandemic, how important our work was to families. Families were lost without their programs, and we get second billing a lot in education. So I think, this ELO-P funding really set the bar that our work is absolutely necessary, so important. And therefore we have to really demonstrate to those people making these decisions, what we do and why our funding needs to stay in place. So that was my big rant. I've had too much coffee. But those are some of my experiences with BACR. And if anybody has any questions, and I don't know, can I get a raise of hands or thumbs? I can't see everybody. If you're planning on going to the challenge. Okay, well, you should go because you're gonna love it. You really should. And it's again, you have all these resources. I don't think I realized the resources that and CalSAC and PCY could really offer. I think Jen, you were at our visit when we were at Elmhurst Middle School this October, and you were there. You saw these kids and these families and the staff just tell their stories. And I think Mia Bonta, our assemblywoman, was like, it really hit her. You can write letters and you can do all that, but really being able to show and tell is the secret to advocacy. It's kind of the secret sauce.
Thanks so much, Gabby. Yeah, love that insight. You said something that I wanted to follow up on and wonder if you had a little bit more insight. You mentioned it being nerve-wracking when you were sitting down with legislators and staff in Sacramento, maybe at the first challenge you went to.
Yeah.
How did you get over that feeling? Did it get easier, or is it always nerve-wracking?
I think it's always there a little bit. I mean, it depends on if you're a really comfortable public speaker. I think once I start talking about something I care about, it kind of goes away. And the first year I was there, I didn't speak. And then when we did it, there's a real luxury to being, not in the room with somebody. When we did it virtually, I was much more comfortable. And then last year, I think it was also just so nice to see everybody again in person that kind of went away. But I think all of us, if you really care and love something, you just get over it, and it's also, it's good to be a little nervous, it's okay. And you just tell yourself, I'm a little nervous, but I can still do this.
I love that advice. Thanks, Gabby.
You bet.
Awesome. Please stick around if you'd like to join for our breakout rooms, but we're gonna move y'all. So that was really helpful to hear some perspective from a veteran, an after-school advocacy veteran like Gabby. So Jen, I'll pass it to you to lead us into our next activity.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gabby. And 100% that hearing from the students, a teacher, a parent, the staff who work there, like I was incredibly moved. And yes, I think it had a huge impact on everybody that was there. It was amazing. Thank you. So now this is the opportunity to go back thinking about everything we've gone over today and really hone in on what your story could be to share. So in a second, we're going to break up into rooms, and we are going to use a notes doc. Well, I think it's a template that you can open and keep for yourself. So as you're filling out these questions, yeah, you're all set. So these are kind of going back to the questions that I had raised earlier. Can you think of some examples where something is different? What has been the changes that you've seen because of ELO-P? Who's benefiting? The students, the families, teachers getting more practice, workforce getting full-time, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. Another question is this funding reaching students that it's supposed to prioritize? So thinking about which students are showing up now. Were you able to reach out? Take kids off your wait list. A lot of answers you could do there. And then, yeah, who is it reaching? I'm realizing I have a double question in here. I'll change the 2 and 3. For number 4 is implementation, is like helping share like context, like where you are in implementation. It's okay to say, we just got started, or, whatever it is. Just help them to see that this is an on-ramp that you're building to, and they should be understanding about the context you're in. Yeah, what would happen if ELO-P funding was reduced or went away? And especially for folks who are working in districts that get tier 2 funding or less, there are some districts who are only getting $50,000 a year. It's really important for folks to know, like, things are limited. It's really hard to run a quality program if you don't have enough money. And then lastly, like thinking of a student or a family that you could kind of help paint a picture for the decision maker. To kind of, this is something I'm starting to work on. I love a lot of numbers and all that, but is really kind of sharing the story of a particular person that you could help see, what was a challenge, how are they being supported in a new or different way today. Okay. So now that you guys have the notes doc, thank you so much for creating your own copy. You guys can use these breakout rooms to brainstorm. Hey, this is what I'm thinking for X. What are you thinking? You guys can give and share those ideas and feedback. And then we can come back together after this and kind of see how people are landing. And if we have remaining questions, absolutely. But now that you have the notes doc, you have the questions. Kim, are you able to split us up? Okay, great.
Yes, the rooms are going to open up right now.
Thank you.
Thank you all for participating in that. Hopefully you all were having some good conversations. We'll wrap up in just a second, but I just wanted to check in with you all. Any questions come up or anything that you wanted to share that came up in your group that you thought others might benefit from hearing? You can come off mute and share, or you can drop it into the chat. Or not. We've been on for we've been on for a bit. So we do have the list of resources, so we'll make sure those get shared out with you all afterwards, so you have access to that, whether it's the lobbying resources or about the budget, or again, making sure you have access to register for the challenge if you're not yet registered. Hopefully now you all feel prepared and excited to attend the challenge, no matter what your advocacy capacity is. And so we hope you join. And then if after today you have more questions about anything we cover, definitely feel free to reach out. You can email myself or Jen or Ben. Our emails are up there. We're happy to chat with you about anything we cover. So if you're like, I didn't really understand what you were talking about, or have a more in the weeds question, or want to know more, feel free to reach out. And I think we asked this question earlier, but curious now if any of you that were not signed up for the challenge are considering coming now. If there's any of you that after today kind of switched gears, decided you might join us after all. Or we've got a smaller group, so maybe you all were the ones planning to join us already. And then Kim dropped in a brief evaluation of the webinar. Please take a moment just to fill that out. You will get, as we mentioned earlier, you'll get access to this recording. You can go back and watch it. You can share it with others. And again, you'll get all the links and resources. So with that, we just want to thank you for joining us. Really appreciate all of you that stuck it out till the end. And we've got a couple minutes left. So if any of you have additional questions, we can stay on for a few minutes and chat with you all. But otherwise, we hope you have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing most of you in Sacramento for the challenge. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, y'all. See you in Sac.
All right, Ben.